Hi, my name is Naveen Zutshi. I'm the Senior Vice President and CIO at Palo Alto Networks. Welcome to Cloud Conversations. We are going to discuss over the next several episodes various topics that my peers and us are really interested as CIOs and CISOs, which is how do we migrate to cloud? What are the applications you should be prioritizing first? What does the security in cloud look like, and is it different than what you do in a data center? Today, I have the distinct pleasure to welcome Declan Morris, CIO at Splunk. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Naveen. Thanks for having me here.
So let's start with first around, I just came back from Australia, and I had a week there, and it was very nice. But your vacation in Australia is up a notch. So do you mind sharing with your audience?
Yeah, sure. It's one of these questions where a fun fact. Well, I was homeless for a year. And the reason why I was homeless for a year was because I lived out of a VW camper van in Australia, and I literally traversed the entire perimeter of Australia down to the Red Centre, 33,000 kilometers. It was the best year of homelessness.
Wow. I got to try some of that.
Highly recommend it, yeah. Highly recommend.
All right, let's get to business.
Yeah.
So one of the topics we're going to talk today is really this notion of cloud migration. I know in Adobe, as well as in Splunk, you have been in the forefront of transforming the business into cloud and also helping the IT organization move to the cloud journey. So when we talk to our peers and now cloud has been approved, the projects have been approved, and we are ready to go, how do you decide which applications we should look at first? And what is the what, when, why, how around the applications that we migrate?
Yeah, I think it's actually worth looking at it on two dimensions because corporate IT is actually different from the product side of the house.
Yeah.
So when I think about the Adobe experience, the company's actually gone through a major transformation. So here's a company that was actually known for selling shrink wrap software, right? You would really go to a store. These stores don't exist anymore, in fact.
Yeah.
And you just buy the software off the shelf, right?
Or a
box.
CD,
You got your CD, you popped it in, you're good to go. Adobe saw the writing on the wall in terms of the way that they had three vectors of innovation. They basically had cloud, social, and mobile. So they made the decision, and they were pretty bold, back in, call it 2010, to go all in on the cloud.
Right.
So on the product side, it was fascinating because it was a huge shift that was public. Right. It was a change in the way they recognized revenue and so forth. And in doing so, they ensured that they had sponsorship at the most senior level.
Got it.
Namely, Shantanu and his exec leadership team.
Sure.
And in many respects, Adobe deserves the recognition it got for doing that transformation. So it really starts from the top down.
Yeah.
And in the case of Adobe, they needed to ensure that they had this truly smooth transition to the cloud.
Right.
So they really got some of the best talent out there to really think about how you go about it. It starts with the people, because if you don't have the right set of folks in place, it's going to be a struggle.
Yeah.
And the way I think about it, if you've got the right people, you're going to be less influenced by the corporate antibodies.
Right.
So there's people out there that you can understand felt that, hey, it's premature to do that, but they went all in. They had the right team. Didn't have to be a large team. It just had to be the right team.
Right.
And as a result of flawless planning and execution, they literally delivered on what was a 2-year journey in terms of setting expectations with the street and so forth. So on the product side, I think it's very, very different relative to the corporate side of the house.
Right.
Because the corporate side of the house is less visible.
Exactly.
My case at Splunk, quite fortunate in the fact that Splunk was pretty bold from the outset and actually went all in on cloud. Very little actually ran on-prem.
Right.
The exception being the web property.
Okay.
Pretty much everything else was already in the cloud. So when we look at the web property, I think it actually is a good use case for those that are actually thinking about moving to the cloud. And the reason being, it's something that ideally is stateless.
Right.
Because when it's stateful and you're trying to move that to the cloud, now you're running into issues in regards to, in terms of network connectivity, sensitivity, et cetera, and how it's going to behave.
And a monolithic app versus a,
For sure, yeah. I mean, the challenge that we see today, right, is these monolithic apps that have to get forklift to the cloud.
yeah,
And the worst case scenario is that people think it's a panacea.
right,
That I just take it from my data center, put it into the cloud, declare success, and go home. But I go back to the people because it also ties in with the way that you have to rethink your approach. Maybe we'll talk a little bit later about DevOps, but it really comes to the forefront in terms of how you approach that. And then the processes that you need to have in place, because the way you manage, maintain your on-prem is not the same way that you manage in the cloud.
Right, very true.
So we were very thoughtful. We went and started to parse out the Splunk.com property.
Got it.
And by doing so, you can still maintain and manage what you run on-prem, toggle over to the cloud, ensure that it's running smooth, it's meeting expectations. If you run into any kind of speed bumps, well, guess what? You can just revert back to your on-prem. And then you can slowly build up in the way that we did it. Big bang is high risk, high stakes. Sometimes you've got no choice, to your earlier comment around the monolithic apps that you have to deal with. But that's basically how we went about solving it for Splunk.com. Start with the people, make sure you've got the right people, understand the processes that you have to have in place to manage, maintain that in the cloud, because it's not the same as on-prem. And then you've got to just really focus on flawless execution. So I'm kind of curious for you, how did it go for you in terms of what you've dealt with on the corporate side?
I think very similar to Splunk story at Palo Alto Networks, right? One of most of the applications are already either SaaS-based applications or are already in the cloud. However, when I came in a couple of years back, we had some customer property applications which were custom developed, and they were on-prem, and our ERP system is on-prem. So in terms of the custom applications, we have been migrating that over to the public cloud. And the reason is around business agility. That's the primary driver for it. We are also transforming those applications, and that's one of the questions I have for you, is from a monolithic app to a microservices-based app, right? So initially we did the forklift, and that was the simpler approach to help with the availability and resilience, but it doesn't really help you as much with the agility part, because you still have to upgrade or change every app completely, and changes there can be fairly complex. So we are now in the process of decomposing that into a 12-factor app and migrating it in a more microservices based approach. So did you, when you looked at that web property for Splunk.com, did you actually decompose the application itself, or did you look at the forklift aspect?
Well, it sounds like somebody's got a playbook out there that you and I are both using, because that's exactly what we did.
Yeah.
We took the app pretty much in its current state.
Right.
And then we have actually gone through the process of decomposing the app. And I think your earlier comment in regards to, it's not just for the sake of technology that we're doing this, it's actually to help accelerate the business.
Yeah.
Because the velocity of the business is only increasing.
Absolutely.
And as a result, we need that flexibility to ensure that we minimize the impact of the overall business. So yeah, absolutely broad adoption of microservices. That allows us to actually look to reusability as well, which I think is just super key. When you look at things such as identity, etc., you should have ideally one identity solution, not a situation where every single app owner shows up with their own identity solution. Right. And I think you and I have seen that in the past, and it creates all kinds of havoc in your environment. So it's been smart. It's not just for the sake of this is the cool thing to do. It's really about helping accelerate the business.
I totally agree, and it gave me a chuckle when you talk about identity, because we are in the process of actually using the same common set of services in our products that are reusable. For example, identity is one of them. Authorization is another, right? Asset management is another, right? So we as a company are also making a major transition into SaaS-based services, and already have been a software company itself. That transition is smooth, and to your point, the transition is critical. At the same time, you want to make sure that IT comes to the forefront and provides the right set of services to your product side as well. So how is the interplay between the corporate IT in Splunk and the product piece where the product is also migrating significantly. You're seeing a lot of traction I'm seeing in the marketplace around Splunk in the cloud side.
Absolutely. First and foremost, the product organization has gone through its own transformation, and I don't use that word lightly because transformation is bandied about quite a bit. But in terms of what's happened with the product organization, if you take a look at, say, Spotify, they were the early champion of the concept around mission teams, agile scrum, and so forth. As product owners in the past and the head of product typically would dictate what actually gets rolled out from a product perspective, we've really inverted that. We've empowered what we call mission teams.
Got it.
So mission teams typically is...
These are like the tribes, or these are the squads?
Yeah, exactly. Very similar. Same concept to tribes. So, team will be composed of 8, individuals, engineers, QA, etc. The lingo that we use is a guild. So we'd have, say, a guild for architecture, a guild for UX, and so forth. Product's already doing this, and they're ironing out the kinks. Well, guess what? We're doing the same thing on the corporate IT side. And the reason being that we need to demonstrate that we are in lockstep with the product organization because we are totally and utterly intertwined. And the example that I give is that when we looked at Splunk Cloud for trial, Godfrey, our chairman, decided, hey, you know what? This is something we need to do. Let's get that done in 3 months. The initial reaction from the product organization was, heck, is a nice way to put it. And what really transpired was the bulk of the work, in fact, was on the IT team. The reason being that when you transact from Splunk.com
the go-to-market
to MuleSoft for the orchestration, to Stripe for the payment, AWS CloudFormation to spin up the instance, Salesforce to capture the opportunity, you end up in a situation where, again, for all of these different services that need to be orchestrated, product only need to show up with the AMI, right? The actual image itself that would run. And we delivered it within 3 months. And I think that was an aha moment for the product organization, is that, IT really, when leveraged to its full extent, brings actually tremendous value. And this is back to your earlier comment that you've got to provide business value to what we do versus just for the sake of it's interesting to do because it's the cool trend. It's about driving business value, helping the business.
Totally agree with you. In fact, if you think about IT as a whole and think about CIO position itself, we are going through a transformation of our own, right? A metamorphosis.
Absolutely,
in some sense. And IT organization itself, I call it reboot IT. The IT of future is going to look very different than the IT of today. What are some of your thoughts around what should IT be focused on?
It's a good question because we have to think about in the context, here we are in Silicon Valley. And to a certain extent, we do live in a bubble. Right? We are at the forefront of technology. And I think about our customers, maybe it's folks in manufacturing, be it in EMEA, maybe it's parts, car manufacturing, whatever the case may be. In Southeast Asia, it could be garment, whatever the case may be. Australia, right, mining and so forth. I think the challenges that those particular CIOs face are quite different to what we have. But at the same time, there's certain parallels. And I think the parallels are in regards to, you hear about this term, having a seat at the table. I think it's more. I think it's actually influencing the outcome.
Absolutely.
We have to influence the outcome. The days where CIOs are measured about uptime and availability and so forth, that's expected of you anyway. The question is, how can you actually influence the business and help the business to achieve its overall objectives? So when we think about it from a strategic perspective, in terms of the priorities and the initiatives, we have to have clear line of sight to that. In terms of just providing technology solutions is not going to ensure that you continue to have the ability to influence the outcome. I think our world is far more exciting. People may say challenging, but I actually think it's pretty exciting because, when you think back to pre-cloud, right? We were all excited about client server. We're all excited about 4GL, all that kind of good stuff. Today, we're at the forefront of edge computing and so forth. Quantum is always a good chuckle in terms of where it's at and where it's going to be, so forth. it's constantly changing, and I think it makes it a very exciting world. So you have to have curiosity.
Yeah.
You have to ensure that you are truly aligned with the business.
Right.
You have to measure your business in terms of how the business sees itself. And in terms of where we are today, there's still a lot more to do, far more to do, but we're headed in the right direction. So how about you? How do you do it on the Palo Alto side?
In terms of transformation, so if you think about digital evolution of the company and conversion of moving from not just a next generation firewall, but providing an entire platform that often is provided through cloud services. So that transformation is in the midst of happening right now, and our customers increasingly are asking us not only provide additional services over the cloud, we want to transact, we want to manage, we want to do the whole thing over the cloud, right? Because it gives them the agility and the flexibility from purchasing standpoint as well, right? And for us, it's been an IT side. How do you provide the set of services, both from a new product implementation perspective, right? Companies like both of ours, we are constantly in the forefront of delivering new products because the customers demand it. And at the same time, also providing the set of services that are scaffolding back into the product itself. So both of those areas, IT plays a critical role. But IT plays a critical role in other industries, unlike any time before. I feel like every company now is a software company.
Yeah.
They have two avatars. They have the real business they have to run, but they have to also be a software company. And CIOs are in a perfect position to help them transform into the digital transformation story, whether it is that, whether it's a software automation story that they want to implement within the company. And it is less about just economics around profitability. It's also about revenue generation, which traditionally IT has not been in the forefront of. And that is incredibly exciting for CIOs to be part of.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think about what's going on with, say, farming equipment, right? There's
amazing.
One of the farming equipment manufacturers here in the States, they actually have an office in downtown San Francisco.
Okay.
And they've just hired IoT engineers.
Yeah.
And they actually have people showing up thinking that they can have equipment repaired and so forth.
Right.
But it just goes to show that, yeah, software is absolutely eating the world. Everything that we do is going to be software enabled. It's just inevitable. And that's why I think the endpoint computing and so forth, that's going to pose new challenges for our collective business in terms of how do you secure those devices that don't have always-on connectivity, and how do you actually get the data from the edge back in? Worth a longer conversation.
Right. So Declan, one of the things you mentioned was planning and the notion of metrics. So take cloud journey as in itself, cloud migration. How do you measure the success of it? And how do you report on that success back to the CEO, CFO? What are the kind of questions they're asking you?
Yeah, so if we pick as an example our GTM, our go-to-market transformation program, there's a certain budget that goes against that, right? Part of the obvious questions is how are you utilizing those dollars? But it doesn't go far enough. It's really about, as you invest those dollars, what value is that bringing back to the business? So as an example, we'll stand up and we've stood up a new partner portal. So the question is not again about the uptime and the accessibility and so forth. How is that resulting in generation of new revenue? Getting more partners onto the program, introducing new customers, expanding the customer base, etc. That's just one example. Another example is something that we call DSA, Data Source Assessment. Again, we can talk about availability, but in our business, it's about onboarding data. And what we're about is enabling the field to be able to leverage these technologies to expand and grow the existing customer base. So tying it back, first of all, to the strategic initiatives, down to priorities, dropping it down into basically roadmaps that we can execute against, tied to very specific programs, and then giving readout to the exec team, be it at the QBRs, right, the quarterly business reviews, be it at the annual strat planning, all the way down to what we're doing in terms of what we call the portfolio working group,
Right.
which is, some people would call it a steering committee. So line of sight and constant communication is critical, but ensuring that we're providing measures that are in the context of the business and less about the technology.
Makes a lot of sense. Very similar to what we are doing. We have a rigorous quarterly business review process here at Palo Alto Networks as well. So we use that. We use the steering committee notion as well in terms of really looking at the transformational initiatives, and cloud is always one of them, right?
Yeah.
Big data is another. So in fact, that reminds me, one of the questions, we have been in partnership for several years, a great partnership between us and Splunk. And that partnership is, there's a lot of synergies between us in terms of taking analytics and looking at big data,
Yeah.
and looking at the threat landscape and helping reduce risk for our customers. So where do you see CIOs, how are CIOs embracing that piece? Really this notion of capturing as much data as possible, looking at insights from that data, and ensuring both from a security standpoint, but also from an analytics standpoint, they're getting the right insights and they're providing the right insights back to the business as well.
It's a very deep topic. It's a very, very deep topic. It's tough to cover in this conversation, but the way I would describe it is as follows. Data actually is your best friend.
Yeah.
The challenge that we face with the bad guys out there, the bad actors, is they don't go away.
Yeah.
And the level of sophistication just continues to be on the rise. I think back to some of the things that we've done, right? So we have an alliance at Splunk where we work with partners, including Palo Alto Networks, to ensure that we are creating an environment where we can share data in an anonymized fashion. Because assume that with a simple phishing attack, somebody's going to get into the environment. And actually think about Nir, your founder, and the annual user conference from last year, which is, you know, once the bad actor is in, they've sometimes got to traverse hundreds, maybe thousands of steps before they finally get to whatever it is that
where they're
want.
expelling the data.
Yeah, so when you look at it in that context, pattern recognition, machine learning, AI, they are going to be critical in the success, in terms of identifying and eradicating. We also have to be more effective in the way that we collaborate and share information, because it truly is no use to any CIO or CISO to find out from a peer that the peer was infiltrated and a week prior they'd addressed with it because it's moving so fast. That's just old information. So I think about the fact that data at scale is really going to help us in terms of being able to form these alliances, collaborate and share, and the ability to actually go in, recognize these patterns, and move as quickly as we can, because we cannot assume that we can build this moat around our business. Our business has too many tentacles.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's our ability to rapidly respond is going to make a huge difference.
So there is something you mentioned around analytics and big data. So take the data lake itself, the corporate data lake that you are servicing or I'm servicing. What are you thinking in terms of the cloud migration around that? Is that already in the cloud for you, or is that something that you're going to transition into the cloud, or are you planning to keep it in Splunk Enterprises? And I'm assuming you're using your own products for that internally. How are you making that connection? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so if I think about, for folks that are out there perhaps listening to this, we've got to think in terms of where their data lives. Because data has gravity.
Right.
And as a result of that, and the easy example is, you know, you've got a few petabytes of data sitting in your data center. To lift that to the cloud and to start to analyze that data is a huge undertaking. It's not impossible, but it's a huge undertaking. So data has gravity. And the way we think about it is that the future truly is hybrid. And that's really what we focus on in our world, ensuring that we enable the customer to do whatever it is be it internal or external, to act on the data where it lives.
Right.
And so we're just seeing a tremendous amount of activity. And data centers are not going away.
Yeah.
These are massive capital investments,
Right.
and they're going to be around for a long, long time.
Right.
So when we think about the data, analyzing the data, it's having that proximity. We have both structured and unstructured data.
Yeah.
Splunk has its strengths and so forth, and is exceptionally good at what it does with the unstructured data. You have other technologies out there, right, that are exceptionally good at the structured. Our challenge, for you and I, for other IT leaders out there, is how do you marry the data in such a way it, again, gives answers back to the business in a way that they feel that is appropriate to drive their business. So we work closely across the board with our business partners to ensure that we're getting the right data to them at the right time, that we're able to analyze the data that allows them to provide insights, to get insights into how they run the business. And it's a constantly moving target because we're constantly dealing with new data sources, right?
Yeah.
Think about how many SaaS apps are you running today?
Right. Hundreds.
Right, and
Hundreds.
so literally it's hundreds, right?
Now you have the fragmentation of SaaS clouds.
Yeah.
How do you marry that data together and make a provide holistic insight to the business?
Yeah, and just to kind of build on that, what's interesting is that for folks out there that are leading these IT organizations, they've got to be aware of the fact, just because they switched over to, say, a SaaS provider and they've sunset their on-prem, doesn't let them off the hook.
Absolutely.
To ensure the safety and integrity of their own data.
Right.
And so the SaaS provider, sure, they help you enable your business, but you really have to have the rigor in terms of what's going on. So if I think about how people are traversing in and out of the cloud, right? That's where Palo Alto really helps out big time to be able to see, okay, is this a legitimate individual that's actually coming in to hit my service? And if so, great. If not, then I need to be able to stop that. So it solves certain challenges for the on-prem, but you cannot ignore the fact that it's your responsibility to secure what's in the cloud. And that's the new norm.
And even starting with visibility, IT leaders need to have complete visibility into all the SaaS apps that are running in your industry to begin with.
Yeah.
And often we are blind to it. And really having that visibility is half of the battle. And then second part is to how do you safely secure it? How do you access control it? How do you two-factor it? How do you manage the data integration? How do you ensure the encryption? So there is quite a bit that goes into it.
Well, that's the joke, right? I've got 140 SaaS apps and I've got 80 unknown SaaS apps. Right. I mean, there's folks out there. Do you consider, for example, Evernote a SaaS app, right? Well, people use that for convenience.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So these are the kind of challenges that we have to think about, and we've got to make sure that we're not inhibiting the business. I think this is really key. We've got to make sure that we have the right security measures in place, the right policies and so forth that we can enforce. But we've got to make sure that we don't get in the way of the business, because in this day and age, it's just too easy to circumvent. We've got to make this easy. We've got to make it easy for our customers.
Declan, one of the things that I've heard you say in press is DevOps is a state of mind or a framework, not a team. Can you elaborate on that? Really curious of your thinking.
Absolutely. I had the good fortune of experiencing DevOps for the first time at Adobe.
Yeah.
And the way I think about it is that it is absolutely a framework, and it's not somebody is a DevOps engineer.
Right, this quote unquote, the mythical DevOps engineer.
Yeah, and the litmus test that I use is that in the ideal world, you have your engineers and your ops people. And typically your ops people, by the way, are software engineers themselves. Right? We're not talking about the people that are physically racking and stacking equipment. We're talking people that have Python skills and so forth. And the real litmus test is you open the door, you look inside, and you can't tell who's the engineer on the product side, who's the engineer on the ops side. And the second one is when you get that P1 in the middle of the night, it's not a case of, oh, well, that's the ops person, that's their responsibility to run with that, that you have a real sense of ownership. Now, there are folks, right, there are organizations that are at such a large scale, they still have their SOC and their NOC and so forth, but generally speaking, it's that sense of shared ownership. It's shared ownership. I have seen in the past where there have been DevOps teams, and what they really are, in fact, are just teams to do tooling, to orchestrate, automation, all that kind of good stuff. It's probably the wrong way to actually tag or name that group, but it is actually a vital part in terms of realizing the capabilities of the DevOps framework. And when it's done well, it really is, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It really is. So my take on DevOps is, again, it's a framework. It's not a title. It's not a team that has got this DevOps certification. It's really this sense of shared ownership. I'm just kind of curious, how about you? What's your take on DevOps?
Yeah, so I think, I come at it from this notion of extreme automation and this notion of back to this, I'm a software engineer myself, right? And I'm glad to see software engineering permeating in systems now.
Yeah.
But the transition is difficult, right? Asking a network engineer who has been on the CLI command all their life to now start writing Python scripts or writing Ruby on Rails is not an easy transition for them. So that's something we need to talk about as well. But from a notion of really focusing on where we have immutable infrastructure, as an example, and having that principle of we can spin up services, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, in a drop of a button, again, back to business agility, and then having that integration all the way from application all the way into the infra, so that when an application owner should be responsible for their entire stack, not just for their application. This is the other mindset change. And then we have this notion of site reliability engineering that we have been focused on. Google pioneered this concept. And the notion there we want to drive is our operations people. We do have operations people, but they should be spending at least 50% or more of their time on automation.
Absolutely. Yeah, the automation orchestration piece is critical because we need to have consistency in the experience from your dev, QA, stage, prod. And I mean, that's the beautiful thing when it's done the right way, to be able to just take that all the way through and ensure that what actually hits your production environment is going to behave the way you expect it. There's nothing worse. I mean, this is what we used to deal with in the good old days, right? You'd have an undersized server sitting in your staging environment, and you pepper it with light data,
right?
Because you know it's going to fall over if it's going to get an excess amount of data. So in this world, we also want consistency in the environments as we operate across, and that's one of the advantages, I would argue, that's in favor of cloud. Is that you can and
being
you should
able to
be
spin
spinning
up services.
You can do it in your own private cloud. It's just a lot harder to do.
Right.
It's a lot harder.
So. Any other questions that I didn't ask that you're dying to answer?
I'm just kind of curious. So, for your world, did you inherit an environment where it was already pretty much cloud, and you didn't really have to do a whole lot of migration beyond the web property?
We had a hybrid environment, and we still do. And to your point, we'll continue to have a hybrid environment. For example, our ERP system is on-prem.
Got it.
Our big data system is some on-prem, mostly on-prem. We have some of it in the cloud. And then we have our customer properties, which are all on-prem. But outside of that, we were heavy SaaS consumers, like most of the companies recently are. So that has been going well. And then what we have been doing is transitioning. We put a plan together around what are the waves of my cloud migration from a application stack and suitability standpoint, and what applications should we migrate first. So we had 30, 40 apps that we needed to migrate over time. So that's been our process. So obviously, scale of challenge is a lot smaller compared to a large legacy provider where you have 1,000 applications and you're now looking as a CIO to migrate 1,000 applications to the cloud. But some of the challenges that we face are similar to the challenges that any other CIO would face, which is you're taking a monolithic app that is deeply embedded in the business process itself. You are trying to migrate that, either forklift it and then reassemble it in a microservices architecture, or you are first reassembling it in a microservice architecture and then migrating it. You are training and your automation techniques change. Your CI/CD pipeline has to be implemented in a similar fashion as well. The notion of this frequent releases has to come in. The Agile and Scrum transformation had to happen as well in IT here. So we had to do that transformation over the last 2 years as well, where we are doing frequent releases, constant releases, and really focusing on MVPs and focusing on the value of the customer first. So quite a bit of work had to go in, even in spite of the fact that we are a fairly young company.
Yeah, I think that new muscle set, right?
Yeah.
To think in terms of agile sprints, storyboards, points, all that kind of stuff is very challenging. Good luck if you ever have to move your ERP to the cloud, because that is not a trivial undertaking at all.
Have you done that?
No, because we're already in the cloud.
Oh, wonderful. Good for you.
But, you know, there's a longer conversation in regards to what do you do with legacy cloud solutions.
Yeah.
So just because you're in the cloud doesn't mean to say you're there.
Yeah.
And for us, scaling to 1 billion is not the same thing as scaling to 2 billion and beyond.
Yeah.
And that's something that folks really do need to actually keep in mind, is that when you adopt a service, think in terms of how much runway is it going to give you. Because if you adopt a service that will get you squeak by for a year, that's not the service for you. So you really need to give it considerable thought. And that's where, again, in lockstep with the business in terms of understanding where that revenue growth is, dealing with multiple currencies, all that kind of stuff that may not be an issue today for you, but it's going to be an issue in the future. These are the kind of things you got to really focus on when you think about not just getting to the cloud, but also managing, maintaining that environment, because we're constantly going to be moving to new services. It's not done just because you're there.
I believe like every time you double as the size of the company, your processes and your technology often gets obsolete with it.
Yeah.
So you need to be constantly scaling your technology and your processes associated with it.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Declan, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks Naveen. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in the Cloud Conversations.
Excellent, thanks.
Thank you.